In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Our Lady, our hope, seat of wisdom. Saint John, pray for us. So I was recently asked a question. Surprise. One of the most confronting questions I've ever been asked in my priestly life. And by confronting, I don't necessarily mean the most provocative, the most salacious, or even the most controversial. In fact, off the top of my head, I can think of a more controversial and salacious question I was asked 2 days ago. I was supplying in a parish, and of course every parish has someone whose vocation is to make sure priests get fat. So I was dragooned into going to have coffee, and as whilst this Filipino lady was force-feeding me pancakes, an elderly woman from across the table very publicly shouts out, "So, Father, did you get shacked up with any young women whilst you're in Oxford?" Now, I remember feeling slightly unnerved, but it's not the most confronting question I've been asked, believe it or not. Because a confronting question, even if just for a few seconds, brings us face to face with what we already knew to be true, but are just too afraid to speak about it, and perhaps even more afraid that someone else articulates it. Why do bishops want to be lied to? Why do bishops want to be lied to? Such was the question asked of me by a still fervently Catholic lady whose family had suffered grievously after the abuse of a family member. Now, although the caveat was not made, I'm quickly going to make one. For of course, not all bishops want to be lied to. But what the lady raised within my consciousness was actually something more profound and more pervasive. And that is the difficulty of being a great and true leader in a fallen world. And obviously, bishops are not the only leaders of the world, not even in our church. In fact, last year I wrote a homily where I quoted J.R. Tolkien, that great Catholic, who said that through his life he had suffered grievously from stupid, tired, dimmed, and bad priests. Furthermore, if you simply put into Google something like, "Why do those in charge want to be lied to?" you'll come up with 131 million responses, with entire forums dedicated to anecdote after anecdote of people feeling they have to lie to their boss, to their parents, to their spouse who they put up on a pedestal, and even to themselves. So how do we make sense of this arrested, weird, strange desire to want to lie to leaders? So perhaps the more accurate and encompassing question would be this: why do some leaders, perhaps many, want to be lied to? And since we who are baptized, called to be priests, prophets, and kings, to be luminaries of virtue, heralds of holiness, witnesses to hope, perhaps we also need to confront that question. Why are we tempted to lie to ourselves? Are we all afraid of disillusionment? Which brings me to the point of the talk tonight. I first came to iWitness 9 years ago as a 23-year-old newly ordained deacon full of enthusiasm. And so I thought to myself as I was flying back to Australia, if I could say one thing to my newly ordained self going to iWitness, trying to live the life of the Spirit, what would it be? And I thought, well, it's the one thing I never heard anyone say. People used to say similar things, but not this in the same robust, bold way. Disillusionment is a grace. Disillusionment is a gift. Disillusionment is great. Especially true within the context of the Catholic life. Now, what I'm saying is not necessarily original, but I'm also conscious that if I went back and saw a priest say to me as a 23-year-old, disillusionment's great, you're going to love it, I think he's psycho. So obviously we have to try and think through this, because when we think of disillusionment, we think of something that's unmitigatedly negative. So I've carved out 5 things, a 5-point pathway to making disillusionment great again. And that's the first one. We're going to make disillusionment great again. And then I'm going to talk about 2 practical reactions that we have to counsel each other to avoid. The first, beware of cynicism. It's the pathway to nihilism, to nothing. Thirdly, beware of poets. Their flattery leads to false romance. And then I want to say something about how then we can overcome the confusion and see where disillusionment fits into our lives. And I've called that being transfigured on the mountain, learning to see again. And finally, I want to conclude with a few words about rediscovering the real romance of the cross. So, Christ did not ordain bureaucracy as such, right? He ordained a church, established a church with a hierarchy, and it has in some quarters of the world, particularly wealthy countries, developed into mass bureaucracy. So there's a joke. The priest's joke. We become the cynicism comes out. But I'm always wary if someone says to me, let's have a consultation process and establish a committee. Because often I think that's sort of double speech for you've been consulted, and we're just going to go on and keep doing what we're doing anyway, but we're placating you. What's my attitude to that? Well, you could get bitter and cynical like I just did, and say, well, maybe the structures aren't good. I think we should always try to make positive recommendations. If we critique something, this is particular, I know bishops often get sick of me saying, this is bad. Then tell me what you would do differently. So, often these structures stay because no one speaks up against them and really vocalizes it. The other thing I'd say is that you can evangelize outside of the committee. I mean, it's something I've said, if this pathway doesn't work, there's nothing stopping you from getting a group of young people together and say, okay, that committee doesn't work, but why don't we organise put on talks this way, or let's try and do this. And, you don't need the bishop to say, go and talk about Christ. But if you have concerns about a structure, say so, and make a positive recommendation. I think it has to go together. Yes, mate.
Can you speak to the kind of labels we've placed in the church with traditionalists or progressives, or and speak to how that might be fragmenting the church in certain ways, and how we can kind of sort through that?
So one of the things that we do when we are disillusioned or nervous is we create narratives. And narratives spread, and the ones that spread are the ones that are most simple, because they're just easy. So you often hear, everything was great, and then Vatican II came along and stuffed it up. So it's so simple, and it proliferates, and okay, there's a semblance of truth that things did become chaotic, and there were things that went wrong, but that is absolutely, intellectually, historically vacuous. I mean, there was so much more going on there. So we often create these narratives because what they do is they help us live in the past and not have to do anything about the future. It can be a huge temptation. The irony is, this is the great irony, is that traditionalists, what we might call traditionalists, I hate this terminology. So I call myself liberal orthodox. Because when you take the liberal intellectual phenomenon is quite creative. So I quite like postmodern philosophy. Because I really believe the church's genius, again, is to abstract that which we think is weird and funky and perfect it. But what's interesting, so what the traditionalists and the liberals, they're actually very similar. They both want certainty. So when the liberal tradition sort of evolved in the 17th, 18th century politically, they were saying, well, let's cut out God because we can't be certain of God. And all you're going to trust is reason. And then some in the church say, oh, we can meet you on that front. Because we don't even need to talk about God anymore. We can argue with pure reason. Pure reason. And we can make our teachings look intellectually attractive. But it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Because even like notions of human rights, the history of that word is imbued with theological language. Our notion of equality is definitely inflected by the understanding of the Trinity. So even if you try to make your language non-theological, it is already. So the left and right disjunction is all a bit foolish. I think the question is really, are we faithful? Faithful to Christ. That's the only real category that we should be in. So I use those terms. I try to avoid using the term secular because of my research, because the secular itself is fragmented. Secular means different things to people. And the people that we call secular, make fun of us. They say only the church talks about the secular. So I think we have to be very careful. That's why I said it's so important that you keep rubbing shoulders with those you wouldn't normally rub shoulders with. Because they keep you alive. They keep your knowledge acute. Otherwise, we just create narratives. At the back. Female leadership in the church. What does good female leadership look like? Well, the biggest error that people fall into is say, well, women have to become priests to be leaders. But the most powerful women in the history of the church, and sometimes they're the most powerful person in the church, are those that pursue holiness. Those who are holy will bring every priest and bishop to order. That's the truth of it. So real power in the church is not a collar or a hierarchical position as such. The real power is holiness. Now, why I keep saying that women must have a role is because, my life, my priestly life, would be so deficient without female friendship. Because women see things differently. Often they are so much better at judging good characters from slightly unsuitable characters than men. A motherly instinct is a powerful instinct that should be heard in the church. So for example, I think of someone that I really think is having a massive impact, and as a woman, is Monica Kuhne, who you might know. Now, Monica Kuhne works for the Archdiocese, but she has done more to defend men like me than all the bishops put together. And that's one woman. One woman. More for people like me than the whole bishops got together, I would say. And I've said that to her. So it's about realizing that you do have a voice and people will listen. And whether it's in your family life or it's in your parish, if you are pursuing holiness and you're prepared to take risks, then you will be a leader, even if you don't wear a collar. It's not what we're about. That's not the true vision of Catholic feminism anyway. Does that kind of answer your question? Yeah.
One last question. Anybody?
Hello, mate.
I feel like with young people today, there's a significant crisis that we're experiencing with young men and young women. Young men not understanding masculinity properly, young women not understanding femininity properly.
Yes.
Because, and I say that with respect to looking at the older generations that have passed before us. I find my friends very cynical about getting into relationships, for example, meeting the right person. It's like, and I understand where it's coming from because it's like we're fighting a wave of popular culture which is against, which stands against a lot of the views that we espouse as Catholics. Can you speak towards to that? You seem to be giving us hope already, and I just thought you maybe could give us a bit more.
Well, I mean, that's kind of what you just said is right. What these people are looking for is hope. And the confusion is, a lot of people think, if we can just crush the church. When you walk past St. Mary's Cathedral, they see that beautiful cathedral in the city. If we could just crush that institution that keeps telling me, speaking to my conscience, then everyone will be happy. But what's that saying? People have no hope. So how do you give people hope? Well, you have to give people Christ. You have to give people Christ. And as I say, the problem is it can just sound rhetorical. But what makes it tangible is you. And you being a loving, kind, generous, virtuous person that's prepared to disclose their weaknesses and to reach out to people that might be on the sort of the existential periphery. What I think the real crisis is that would give people more hope is if the church was better at explaining its teachings in public discourse. And this goes back to the problem I went to earlier. Because often the church has lost touch with reality. It's still speaking of things like natural law in ways that people no longer accept and understand. The language itself is being cannibalized. And I remember I said this last year. It's a Marxian strategy. Marx said, if you want to destroy a culture, then take the language and change the meaning. And that's why they've gone after marriage. Bedrock of society. Change the meaning. And you know you've won. When no one remembers what marriage used to be. So it's so important that we keep using that language in the proper sense. That we are compassionate and kind in the way we talk about our teaching. But nevertheless, we can show it, express it, and articulate it in a manner that is persuasive. How we do that is something we need to think about. But we must stop reacting against the culture, because the culture is not what we think it is anymore.
Yeah, this is going to be a pump tonight, guys. Can I just say? Thank you so much again, Father Greg, for answering our questions. So now we're going to move into a little bit of a different theme for the evening. So we're moving away from talks and we're really moving into our relationship with Jesus, our relationship with Christ. So we're going to start off in here with the rosary that will be led by Savio, wherever he is. And after then, we'll process peacefully, hopefully, prayerfully, down to the chapel where we will have Eucharistic healing. This is a real opportunity for us to bring the things that we want to be disillusioned from, the things that are burdening us, the things that are bringing us down, really bring that all to Jesus, bring it all to God, and lay it at his feet through adoration, through Eucharistic healing. So I really encourage you, as we're going through the rosary, as you move through towards the chapel, as you're in the chapel itself, really start to think about those things in your life, like we've heard over the past weekend, that are really those kind of stumbling blocks from stopping you from having that closer relationship with God. Something that maybe you might have just put in a corner and gone, this is the too hard basket. Tonight is the night to get that basket, place it in front of Jesus and go, this right here, this is what I need help with. This is our opportunity to go to God with our hands open, just ready to receive his grace and ready to receive his love. So we've got some leaders handing out some candles, which we'll light as well during the rosary. During Eucharistic healing as well, there will be opportunities for